That night, I walked into my parents' house with my heart pounding in an odd mixture of excitement and relief. Because for once in my life, I had something worth sharing. Something that wasn't about my sister or her endless string of supposed achievements. Something that was mine and mine alone. I had worked for years to climb up from the lowest position at my firm. Staying late, sacrificing weekends, taking on projects no one else wanted, all just to prove to myself that I wasn't the failure everyone had made me feel I was. That morning, when my manager shook my hand and told me I had earned the promotion to senior analyst, I nearly burst into tears, not because of the title, not even because of the raise, but because for the first time I felt seen. I felt valued. I walked into my parents' home holding on to that joy, like a fragile crystal, hoping, just this once, that my family would acknowledge me, that maybe my parents' eyes would shine with pride the way they always did for Claire. The dining room was warm with the scent of roasted chicken and garlic, my mother bustling back and forth from the kitchen, my father already seated with his glass of wine, and Claire perfectly poised in her chair, hair curled, smile sharp enough to cut through steel. She looked up as I entered, her gaze sweeping over me with that familiar blend of condescension and curiosity, as if she was always waiting for me to present something she could dismantle. I sat down, greeted everyone politely, and held back my news for a moment, trying to time it, rehearsing the words in my head like a child preparing to recite a poem. The meal began in ordinary fashion. Small talk about the weather, my father mentioning some article he read, my mother fussing over whether we wanted more bread, and Claire effortlessly steering the conversation toward herself, her recent charity gala, her boss's endless praise, her new Pilates instructor who thought she had the posture of a dancer. I listened, as I always did, but this time I had something that could shift the spotlight, something that could pull me out of the shadows where I had lived most of my life. So, when there was a pause, I cleared my throat, my hands trembling slightly, and I said with as much calm confidence as I could muster, "Actually, I have some news of my own. Today I was promoted at work. I'm now a senior analyst." The words hung in the air like fireworks waiting to explode, and for one glorious second I imagined smiles, applause, maybe even the rare praise of my father saying, "Well done, Emily." But before anyone else could speak, Claire leaned back, her lips curving into that cruel smirk I had come to know too well, and she said, her tone dripping with mockery, "Promotion? Oh, Emily, don't get too proud. Everyone knows those things are handed out more out of pity than merit. I mean, let's be honest, you've been stuck in the same position for what, years? Your boss probably felt sorry for you and threw you a bone." My stomach dropped so fast, I thought I might be sick right there at the table. The words stung, not just because they were cruel, but because they played directly into my deepest insecurities, the doubts I had battled in silence for so long. I tried to laugh it off, to say lightly, "Actually, I worked very hard for this," but she wasn't done. Her eyes gleamed with the thrill of having an audience, and she began unearthing every old wound she could find, like she had been saving them for this exact moment. "Remember when you flunked that economics exam in college? Or when you froze during your presentation at Dad's friend's office? You've always cracked under pressure. Honestly, it's a miracle they even keep you around at that firm." She laughed, tossing her hair, glancing at my parents as if inviting them to join in. My mother shifted uncomfortably, fiddling with her napkin. My father stared down at his plate, and not a single word came to my defense. That silence was louder than any insult Claire could have hurled. It was their quiet confirmation that, yes, maybe she was right. I felt the walls closing in, the dining room suddenly too small, the chandelier's light too harsh on my face. I wanted to scream, to stand up and shout that she was wrong, that I wasn't weak, that I had earned this, but the words lodged in my throat like stones. Instead, I sat there, burning, trembling, my fork clattering against the plate because my hand shook too much to hold it steady. Claire, sensing my unraveling, pressed harder. "Honestly, Emily, don't set yourself up for disappointment. Some people just aren't meant to shine, and that's okay. You can't all be me." The laughter she forced out after that, sharp and hollow, felt like knives in my chest. I glanced at my parents again, begging silently for one of them to say something, anything, but the silence persisted, heavy and suffocating, until the meal dragged on in a haze I could barely taste. By the time it was over, I could barely hold myself together. I mumbled some excuse about being tired, and as soon as I was out of sight, I rushed to my old bedroom, locked the door, and pressed my back against it, the tears spilling faster than I could wipe them away. My chest heaved with sobs of frustration, humiliation, and something sharper, anger, deep and raw. That night, as I lay on my childhood bed staring up at the familiar cracks in the ceiling, I replayed every word she had said, every smirk, every silence from my parents that felt like betrayal. And something inside me hardened. For years, I had endured her cruelty, convinced myself to be the bigger person, and swallowed my pain in silence. But not this time. Not after she had humiliated me so completely in front of the very people whose approval I had always craved. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding with a new resolve. That was the night I promised myself. I would not let Claire destroy me. Not again. In the days following that humiliating dinner, I tried to bury myself in work, convincing myself that Claire's words had only been another cruel attempt to diminish me, something I should simply let roll off my shoulders. But it didn't take long for me to realize she had no intention of letting the humiliation end at the dining room table. That dinner had only been the opening move in a much larger game she intended to play at my expense. Within a week, whispers began swirling at my workplace. Subtle at first, coworkers exchanging looks when I walked into the break room, hushed voices that cut off abruptly when I entered a conversation, and then the first rumor reached me like a poisoned dart. Someone was saying that I hadn't earned my promotion at all, that I had manipulated my way into it by cozying up to my boss, that pity rather than performance had lifted me upward. I tried to ignore it, brushing off the gossip. But then came the emails, anonymous, venomous, carefully crafted messages sent directly to my manager claiming I was lazy, dishonest and incompetent, that I had plagiarized reports, that I had taken credit for other people's work. Each email was written with a tone so eerily familiar that I could practically hear Claire's voice narrating the sentences in my mind. My boss called me into his office one morning, his expression tight, holding the printed copies of those emails in his hands. And though he didn't accuse me outright, the doubt in his eyes stabbed me like a blade. "Emily," he said carefully, "I know this might not be true, but I need you to be aware of what's being said. Be mindful." Mindful? How could I be mindful of lies designed to dismantle everything I had built? I left his office trembling, my hands clammy, my mind racing with panic, because I knew this wasn't a coincidence. This was orchestrated. Claire was behind it, and she wasn't content with embarrassing me in front of our family. Now she wanted to strip me of my livelihood, my reputation, the one area of my life where I had finally begun to feel like I mattered. At first, I told myself to be strong, that I could endure her jealousy, but then the attacks deepened in ways I hadn't imagined. One morning, I woke to discover that my social media accounts had been hacked. Posts I never wrote plastered across my pages. Ugly rants about coworkers, crude jokes, and even offensive statements that painted me as someone cruel and prejudiced. Friends I had known for years messaged me in anger and disappointment. Some even blocked me outright before I could explain. I sat frozen at my desk, staring at the screen, my heart hammering in disbelief, because this wasn't just professional sabotage, it was personal annihilation. My identity was being twisted, my voice stolen, and with every passing day, the web of lies grew thicker. People I had trusted began pulling away, whispering behind my back, regarding me with suspicion, and the walls of isolation began to close in. It was like drowning slowly, while everyone stood on the shore watching, unsure whether to save me or let me sink. And through it all, I saw her fingerprints in every detail. The way the insults were phrased, the particular bitter tone, the careful balance of truth mixed with poison that only Claire could craft. She wanted me crushed beneath her heel, stripped of dignity, reduced to ashes so she could once again stand tall as the favored daughter, the golden child, while I withered into the failure she had always claimed I was. For a time, I felt paralyzed, consumed by despair. But then something shifted inside me, something dark and unyielding that had been born the night of that dinner humiliation. Instead of collapsing under the weight of her attacks, I began to plan, to fight back in silence. I started collecting evidence, screenshots of hacked posts, records of suspicious login attempts, emails with hidden metadata that could be traced, text messages she carelessly sent when she forgot to cloak her malice. I created folders on my computer labeled innocuously, but filled with every piece of damning evidence I could find, building a case brick by brick. Outwardly, I played the role of the defeated sister, letting her believe she was winning, that her venom was working, but inwardly I was calculating, waiting, strengthening. I learned quickly that revenge is not about rage, it is about patience, precision, and timing. I stopped reacting emotionally, stopped giving her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. When she smirked at me in passing, I smiled back faintly, as if too worn down to care, and she mistook my silence for weakness. But inside, the storm was gathering, and I swore to myself that when the time came, I would not only expose her lies, but ensure that her cruelty would backfire most devastatingly. Still, enduring those weeks was torture. Every day felt like a battle for survival. My reputation at work dangling by a thread, my friendships deteriorating, my confidence splintering under the weight of so many accusations. Yet every night, when I sat alone staring at the evidence I had gathered, I reminded myself, this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of my rise from the ruins she had tried to bury me in. She thought she was clever, weaving her traps and disguising her tracks, but she underestimated me. She believed I would crumble, as I always had before. But what she didn't know was that humiliation has a way of forging steel out of fragile glass, and I was no longer the sister she could toy with at her leisure. I was something else now, something sharper, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. And though she couldn't see it yet, the war she had started was one she could never win. The breaking point came on a stormy Friday evening, when the rain lashed against my apartment windows like nature itself was warning me of the chaos that was about to unfold. Because that was the night Claire decided to strike not at my job, not at my friendships, but at the very heart of my life, my relationship. I had been dating Daniel for nearly 2 years, a man who had stood by me through my struggles, who saw in me the worth I often failed to see in myself. And though our love had grown strong, it was not immune to the venom Claire could brew. That night, Daniel arrived at my door with a face pale and stiff, his jaw clenched, and the weight of suspicion clouding his eyes. "Emily," he began, his voice unsteady, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My heart froze. He pulled out his phone, opened a message thread filled with screenshots Claire had sent him. Screenshots doctored to look like conversations between me and another man, filled with flirtations and confessions of betrayal. For a moment, the world spun out from under me. The floor might as well have collapsed, because to see the doubt in his eyes was like being stabbed in the chest. "She told me you've been lying," he said, his voice cracking, "that you've been seeing someone else behind my back." For a second, I couldn't breathe, couldn't even find words, because the fear of losing him, the one person I could rely on, felt unbearable. But then, like a spark in the darkness, I remembered what I had been building all along, the evidence, the truth I had stored away, the arsenal she had never suspected I would use. With trembling hands, I opened my laptop, showed him the folders of screenshots, the metadata of her emails, the hacked accounts, the trail of destruction that pointed not to me, but to her. I showed him the timestamps proving her lies, the inconsistencies in the forged conversations, and the proof of malicious intent. As he scrolled through it all, I watched the doubt drain from his eyes, replaced with a dawning horror, not at me, but at her. "My God," he whispered, his voice heavy with disbelief. "She did all this to you?" And in that moment, I knew I had not lost him. He wrapped his arms around me, his embrace fierce and protective, and he promised he would stand by me no matter what. That night, something inside me solidified. With his support at my side, I no longer felt like a victim stumbling through darkness. I felt like a warrior preparing for the final strike. The next step was inevitable. I had to confront the people who had silently allowed her cruelty to fester for years. My parents. For too long, they had remained silent, complicit in their unwillingness to check her behavior, content to let me carry the weight of her cruelty. But no more. On Sunday evening, I went to their house, Daniel by my side, my laptop in my bag like a weapon ready to be unsheathed. Claire was already there, sipping wine as though nothing in the world could touch her smirk widening the second she saw me. "Oh, look who decided to crawl back," she said, her voice mocking. But this time I didn't flinch. I sat at the table, opened my laptop, and began to speak, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through her smugness. I laid out everything: the emails, the rumors, the hacked accounts, the forged screenshots she had tried to feed Daniel. I showed them every detail, every cruel thread she had woven into her web, and for once the silence that followed was not one of complicity, but of stunned disbelief. My mother's face drained of color, her napkin crumpling in her hands. My father's mouth opened and closed, struggling to process the mountain of evidence before him. And Claire? Her face went pale, then flushed with red, her mouth opening in protest, but no words came out. She had been caught, stripped bare, her schemes laid out in the harsh light of truth. "How could you?" my mother whispered at last, her voice trembling. "She's your sister." But Claire said nothing, her eyes darting, searching for an escape, for a way to twist the narrative as she always had. But this time there was no exit. I looked at her, meeting her eyes directly, and said, "You wanted to ruin me. You wanted to destroy my life. But all you've done is reveal who you really are." The room was thick with tension, years of denial collapsing under the weight of undeniable proof. For the first time in my life, the power dynamic had shifted. She was the one cornered, and I was the one holding the truth. But I wasn't finished yet. The final move had to be made where she had struck hardest, at my workplace. Monday morning, I walked into my manager's office with Daniel by my side as a witness, my laptop in hand. I presented everything, laid out the evidence in meticulous detail, and showed him the chain of false accusations and forged messages that had poisoned his perception of me. He sat back in his chair, his brow furrowed, his expression slowly changing from suspicion to shame. "Emily," he said finally, his voice heavy with regret, "I owe you an apology. I should have trusted you more." Relief washed through me like a cleansing fire. But more than that, I saw the balance of power tipping away from her. The sympathy that had once belonged to Claire, the endless indulgence she had received, now shifted to me. My manager promised to take action, to ensure that my record was cleared, that my reputation was restored. And as I walked out of that office, I felt lighter than I had in months, maybe even years. Claire's power crumbled rapidly after that. Friends who had doubted me reached out in remorse when I revealed the truth, the lies she had spread dissolving under the evidence I exposed. My parents, who had so often stood silent, now looked at her not with pride, but with disappointment so deep it cut her to the bone. And Daniel, he stood by me unwaveringly, his faith in me stronger than ever. I watched as the empire she had built on manipulation and cruelty collapsed, the mask she had worn for so long finally shattering, leaving her exposed and small. For the first time in my life, I stood taller than her shadow, free from the chains she had wrapped around me since childhood. And yet, as I looked at her, silent, humiliated, unable to twist the narrative anymore, I felt no pity. She had chosen this war, drawn the battle lines, and sharpened her blades. I had simply finished what she had started. My revenge wasn't about destroying her. It was about reclaiming myself, about showing her and everyone else that I would no longer be her victim, that I was stronger than her cruelty, sharper than her lies. That night, as I lay beside Daniel, his hand entwined with mine, I finally felt something I hadn't known in years: peace. For the first time, I wasn't haunted by her voice, her smirk, her endless attempts to diminish me. I was free, and in that freedom, I discovered the truest revenge of all. Not her destruction, but my survival, my strength, and my refusal to ever again live beneath her shadow.